Welcome to We Mean Business. I'm Steve Dorfman. Today we welcome returning guest Rob Jolles. About a year ago we had Rob on the show talking about his book, Customer-Centered Selling. Rob's got a brand new book about influence, and it's called How to Change Minds: The Art of Influence Without Manipulation. Rob, welcome back.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So you are a 3-time best-selling author. You are a professional speaker, corporate trainer, and this is really your 5th book, right? So why this book?
Well, I'd spent, I guess, close to 30 years talking about influence and persuasion. That's nothing new to me. And as a matter of fact, this book took probably 10 years in the making, because Customer-Centered Selling actually came out in 1998, and then its 2nd edition came out in 2010. And if you look at the first sentence in the Customer-Centered Selling book, it actually says, I haven't changed my mind. I still feel the same way. I still think we probably want to ask questions and listen. I still think the more the other person talks, probably the more they'll appreciate who they're talking to. I didn't change my mind, but I did feel that there was one gap missing. And after having publishers say, when's the next sales book? When's the next sales book? I finally thought, I do have something I want to say. And that is, okay, you've heard from me for decades about how we need to change minds, how we need to influence and persuade. I wanted to write a book about why. And I think that's critical, because many salespeople, or just people that want to adopt the skills of a salesperson, will resist the tactics that are taught because they really don't believe why they're doing it. In other words, they go, well, what if I'm manipulative? Well, that's a good point. Probably don't want to do it. So maybe there needs to be a conversation about ethics. Maybe there needs to be a conversation about the line between influence and manipulation. And that's what started burning in me, and that's when I wanted to write that book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I looked up the word influence in the dictionary, and it said to manipulate. I'm kidding. It doesn't say that.
We're going to fix that.
Scared the heck out of you, didn't I? But that's how a lot of people hold it. That's how a lot of people think of it. So how do we get past that?
Well, and it's not easy. I mean, that's why it's not an article. I've got, I think, 16 different litmus tests within the book on pretty much everywhere we go. Keep trying to show you this line. But it is a very vague line. And that's why people are troubled with it. So I'm going to define it for you right now. I'm going to give you the line. It may not make you happy, but I'm going to tell you the line that we start with, and that is that the difference between influence and manipulation, at the end of the day, is sheer intent. In other words, the process I'm building won't be dramatically different between influence and manipulation, but the intent of why I'm using it. Now you see why we have to have that conversation as to why we were influencing. That is going to drive how I use these tactics. Strangely enough, the tactics don't change all that much.
Why is it so important that we learn how to change people's minds?
Well, because that's a great question. Because, in fact, I believe at the end of the day, it can, and I don't mean figuratively, I say literally, it can save lives. There was one story that was removed from that book. Usually publishers don't take out stories, but the publisher said, we got to take this one out. So I've been yapping about it constantly. I'm making up for it on shows and radio shows, but I like that story. But it was 2 pages into the book, and I understood it. And I'll give it to you in 30 seconds. But this is the way I kicked the book off, and it's going to answer your question. You're sitting at a bar with a friend who tends to drink a lot. And today's no exception. And your friend's had too much to drink, and as usual, you've said, why don't you give me the car keys? And your friend has said, no, I'm okay, I'll be able to drive. And you said, no, really, please, here's what will happen to you. Let me have the car keys. And that doesn't work, and so you don't get the car keys. And the friend takes off to drive home. Only this time, things are different. This time, your friend doesn't make it home. Your friend makes it to the hospital, but the person that they kill on the road doesn't make it home or to the hospital. Now, for the rest of that person's life, after the humiliation of the trial and probably a prison sentence, they're going to live with this for the rest of their life, and it will probably poison their life. Of course, the family that was impacted, they're going to live with this as well, but so are you. And because you had an opportunity to get the car keys. Now, this is dramatic, but in that book, I want to show people how to get the car keys. And if you want to take the word car keys out and say how to fill in the blank with your children, or how to fill in the blank with your boss, or with your coworkers, it goes on and on. These scenarios play out. They're not all life and death, but they're career ending. They create potential dysfunctional families. There's so many scenarios. That's what I mean in terms of, are we talking about it? If I get those car keys, am I manipulating if I use techniques to get them, or am I influencing someone's decision? By intent, quickly, if it only serves me, then I'm manipulating you. If it serves those around me, then I believe I'm using these skills of influence for good, and I'm going to put them on the influence side. But now you see that tricky little line that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's really good. When we talk about influence in the workplace, a lot of people get caught up with the buzzword buy-in. And I've got a real problem with the word buy-in. And so, can you help us make the distinction between buy-in and ownership?
Well, that's a good one, and off camera, I'll ask you about your problem with the word buy-in.
Well, it assumes that we're trying to sell something or push something on somebody. If we're trying to create the buy-in, I think that if we're coming from the right place intent-wise, then and if we're skilled about facilitating a conversation, then we can create ownership instead of buy-in.
Okay. I just quite simply want to make it the team's idea. If I'm a manager, I want to make it their idea. I worked for Xerox for many years. I had good managers and not so good managers. The not so good would put us in a room and say, folks, this just came down from corporate. I don't like it. We're not going to like it, but this is what we got to do. That doesn't motivate us to take that hill, okay? But you have a responsibility, and I'm just using a management scenario. You have a responsibility as a manager, and that means if corporate says this, you need to get those troops. My father was a Marine. You need to get those troops behind you and to believe that this is what we need to do. And not for me, but for the corporation. If you have trouble with that, you probably should look at why you're a manager. But if you're a manager, that comes with your responsibility. You are responsible to that corporation. That makes people uncomfortable. But I'm just telling you, I don't know whether we're going to call it buy-in. I would just prefer it to be the team's idea and not my idea. And we can make that happen.
So you refer to a decision cycle that people experience. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think that if you're going to talk about how to change someone's mind, you probably want to look inside their mind first, so we don't just go, here are 6 tactics, good luck. So it's not a straitjacket. That really throws people when they're learning any type of process so I have to do these 7 things in sequence. Actually, no. What I want you to do is start by figuring out where the other person is in their decision cycle. Where's Steve right now? Does he know there's an issue but doesn't want to do anything about it? And I love that wedge the most because that's where most people are. Most people aren't completely unaware. They typically know they have an issue, but it's not a big issue. When it becomes a big issue, they'll take care of it. So like a cigarette smoker, I don't smoke that much, or I don't drink that much coffee, and so far my health is good. Knock on wood. Well, okay, so we have a choice. We can come back and talk to you when your health begins to deteriorate, or we could talk about it now. That's a classic stage in the cycle. But not everyone's there. So rather than line up my favorite tactics and say, here, use these, I think the first healthy question is, where's the person you're communicating with in their 6-stage cycle? And then what would be the intelligent idea or tactic to line up with where they are. And so I love working with decision cycles because I can show decision points. I can show where someone is. And immediately it provides logic to what we're doing. Remember, I think, particularly from a sales perspective, so many salespeople have been told, this is our process. Okay, we will use this. It's completely misused. It should expand and contract based on personality. It should expand and contract based on where they are in their decision cycle. And the tactics should be nothing more than a guide along that route to say, well, what do you think we need and don't need along this route? How could I make a decision like that if I can't answer where's the person I'm communicating with in their decision cycle? Once I've got that, things become clearer to me. It's all about believing. If you believe it, you'll use it. If you don't, It's just another book that's going to gather dust.
Mm-hmm. You talk about these 6 points, right? So give us an example of maybe one or two of them.
Okay. Well, you have, to me, the two biggest ones. You have the satisfied stage where somebody's completely happy and you love to talk to them about something, but they're totally happy. We're probably not going to change a whole lot of minds there. As a matter of fact, statistically, I can tell you that that's about 4.5% of the population on any given area is completely happy. They just don't need a new watch. They just bought one. I'll argue that a little bit and say it's not quite. People think that number's a little low. They think, well, in my area, I know you talk to different people at this table. The person who is selling lawn care or whatever. Well, in my area, it's about half the people that are really satisfied. In fact, it's a misread. A lot of people will tell you they're satisfied because they don't want to make a change. Mm-hmm. So you can ask them, what do you think of the marketing program you have now? And they go, guys, in marketing, I'm looking at this card. I like my marketing a lot because I don't want to make a marketing change today. So it's a small wedge. The bigger wedge, and the one I spoke about, is the acknowledge wedge, which is if there's trust, they'll look at you, not the first sentence out of their mouth, but the 10th and go, not as happy as we'd like to be in this particular area, but we don't really have the budget or the time to do anything about it. And if it's a personal situation, I know that my child is having issues with homework, but they're doing well in the other classes, and this doesn't really seem to be a big issue yet. That's the acknowledge stage, and you asked for 2. That's critical. I'll give you just one more. The one over that is called the criteria stage. There's a line in the sand that people will cross at some point. If there's no one there to help influence them, usually it's when a small problem has become a big problem. But eventually they will cross it. When they do, that's when they have needs. That's when they're looking for the lawn care. That's when they're looking for a marketing program. Unfortunately, it's usually a little bit late. They're looking for it because they lost their biggest client because they didn't have fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. So we believe that when you start looking at where they are, if I've got somebody who wants a solution, why would I start hammering them or asking questions about a problem they've already decided to fix? And yet, if they haven't decided to fix an issue, but they're inquiring about a solution, why would I talk to them about a solution if they haven't made a commitment to change? So you can see how I need to get inside that wheel a little bit to help me strategically work intelligently with someone.
You mentioned trust. So in order to influence someone, does trust have to exist? And if so, how do we create that trust?
Well, we'd have to cut the cameras right now if I said, no, trust, it's funny. It was a big 90s thing, but trust is out these days. So it all starts with trust. And it's funny you bring it up because in 1988, way back when I was a Xerox employee, we sat in a room, we built a 16-step sales model. And the only piece we left off was trust. We actually thought, well, everyone knows that. Trust, it's a given. In fact, if you don't trust me, nothing else matters. How do I get to the tougher questions? The questions that may disturb you. How do I earn the right to ask you about something that's private, that's a problem that you're dealing with, if there's no trust? Mm-hmm. So not only do I think it's important, but I think that we've got to get past this notion that it's inherent, that everybody, that trust is just, I don't know, I have to build a process for trust. And I have in the book. I will methodically say, if you do these 4 things, you will gain trust. Mm-hmm. Because with trust, I can get at those difficulties. But nobody's going to talk to me about their drinking problem if they don't trust me. So I can't sit down and go, here you drink a lot, let's talk about it. It'll never happen. Mm-hmm.
So how do you go about earning someone's trust?
I had a feeling we might get it. Some of it sounds a little bit simple. But in fact, I'm a guy who goes around the country with tape recorders, slides them in front of people and say, you talk to you, and create trust. I just don't hear it on the tape recorder when I do. So how about we talk about a couple things. One, we're going to ask questions. You knew that was coming, okay? Mm-hmm. But those questions are going to be open questions. So I'm not here to interrogate you. I know the more you talk, the more you like me. So I'm going to use questions like what and why and how and tell and describe and really let you paint the picture. So A, I'm going to keep those questions open. I'm going to ask questions. Point number 2, I'm not going to lead with problem-related questions. I don't want to sit you down, to talk to you about carrying my book in your bookstore and say, so glad you gave me the time. Do you have a problem with the way you're selling books now? It makes people very uncomfortable. I would like to know how you're currently bringing people in and what new books are you showing them, but I want it to be open. I want it to be not problem related. I want it, number 3, I want to actively listen. Steve, people don't do that. They just don't do that. Right now, we're both actively listening. And we're actively listening because we're making eye contact. We're listening. You're taking notes. I'm watching you. Okay? That means a lot to me. That says this guy's listening to me. So there are things that we can do to not broad brush actively listen, but actually really seriously dial in and listen. And the 4th thing is we have to begin with the end in mind. We have to play our strengths. If I sell organic materials for a lawn, then I want to hear about their views about the environment. I want to hear about some of these pieces, because if I'm dealing with somebody who has no interest in the environment whatsoever, I'm either going to have to look at my truck and see what else we may have, or maybe we're both wasting each other's time. But why am I not at least beginning to hunt and peck around the areas I'm strong in? Real fast, at Xerox, we made a copier that was easy to use. It was expensive. It cost more and typically did less. That's not a knock against my Xerox brothers and sisters. A few things it did real well. For instance, as ease of use was something it did well. Why wouldn't I want to ask early on who uses the equipment? It's open, it's not problem related, it has an end in mind, and I'm going to dial in and listen very carefully when you tell me, everyone in the office? I like that answer. Or no, or just that guy. He used to be a tech rep for you all. So I'm going to stay off of ease of use. That's going to be irrelevant here. But if I do those 4 things, I can create trust and begin to get a head start on where the rest of the conversation's going.
I'm going to ask you a little bit more about active listening, because I know you're right about that. I'm going to also ask you about whether we underestimate the power of great questions. We've got to take a break. When we come back, we'll address those 2 things. You're watching We Mean Business. I'm here today with Rob Jolles. His new book is called How to Change Minds. We'll be back in seconds.
There is also a very attractive extended warranty option that includes free service and parts for the next 5 years. But there's no need for you to get that. You failed to get the test you needed at the doctor that would have detected disease early enough where it could have been treated. So you won't be around in 2 years to see him grow up, which means the warranty would be useless. Okay, sign here, please.
For a list of tests every man should have, go to ahrq.gov.
Welcome back to We Mean Business. We're here with returning guest, Rob Jolles. His newest book is called How to Change Minds. And Rob, we talked a little bit about questions. We talked a little bit about active listening, and you addressed these things in the book. And these are big. I don't know if I've just been paying a lot more attention to them lately, but these are big things to talk about. I mean, let's start with powerful questions. Do we underestimate the power in powerful questions?
We absolutely do. And I can give you a proof source. If you go, one of my best clients are banks. I've worked with 25, 30 different banks in the U.S. Most of them are merging with each other, but I've been. So
now it's all one bank.
It's just a bank. That's what they call themselves now. So,
one day.
I went for stock in that one, but they pride themselves. If you ever go into a bank, they actually methodically write out questionnaires where they'll sit down and they'll call it a risk assessment sometimes, which it's a wonderful tool. But here's somebody who sat down and worked on this and distributed it throughout a bank, and yet what we talked about, questions are closed right off the bat. The questions are problem related right off the bat. They break some of the most basic rules that we've covered. So what seems obvious is apparently not as obvious as we give it credit for. And again, when I do bring tape recorders out, and I bring them out all the time for workshops, I don't tell people what's going on. I just tell them, I just want to hear you have that conversation. Persuade that individual. Not only do I rarely hear questions, but whenever I hear them, they're almost always closed. And closed questions, particularly early on, do make people uncomfortable. That's what you get from a police officer when you're stopped, and they're doing their job, but there isn't a whole lot of tell me about your feelings of the speed limit here in Montgomery County. You understand how fast you're going. You know the laws in this state, and that doesn't warm up a conversation. That's okay. I don't want to do that either. I want them open. So what seems obvious, Steve, is not quite as obvious as we give it.
And let's talk about the active listening part, because this is both sides of the coin. So once we've asked these powerful questions, we've been really thoughtful about what open questions to ask. How can we be really good at actively listening?
I think I took a contrarian angle at that in the book, and I like it. Of course, I wrote it, so I should like it. But
I hope so.
That guy was good who wrote that. But what I did was I started polling people on what they don't like from others when they're being listened to.
That's great.
And so it was sort of, I wanted to get behind the curtain. You tell me. And I won't give you all 10 on the list, the top 10, but I'll tell you this. Number 1 exceeded all the numbers of the next 9 in total. And I can tell you what that one is, and that is interrupting me. People hate when they're interrupted.
Wait. No, I'm just kidding.
They hate when they're interrupted.
And it happens all the time.
Right. And why? Because we're thinking that next thought. We're trying to jump in. So when we sit back and ask those questions and we say actively listen, what you do, which is very smart, I do the same thing. You're note-taking. 1, because I'm saying very brilliant things and you want to make sure you remember. But 2 is he's making a point. I like that point, and I want to come back to that point, or I want to hear more about that point. So you're making a note to yourself. That way, you're actively listening. You're not losing your thought. And I'm feeling very good about the person I'm talking to. So we're both winning. But I wish people would do more note-taking. It'll help you so you don't interrupt, and it'll get that thought just in case you're a little nervous about forgetting it. It'll be there. It's sitting right there for you.
Do you address the power of the pause?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I love the pause.
Yeah.
A matter of fact, I have an exercise I put people through where I have a metronome that's clicking. And I force them, they're working, it's a mental agility exercise. But part of the exercise is they have to actually let that metronome hit and pause before they give me what I'm looking for. I don't actually want them to go bing, bing. I want them to hear it, pause, and give me something else.
And why is that so important?
Well, A, it's going to demonstrate that you're listening. Who wants to talk and then somebody come right in? But B, a lot of times it helps me to think clearer, so I don't just, if I can't think of a question, Steve, I'm going to make a statement. So it's training the mind to say, relax.
That's really good. If I can't think of a question, I'm going to make a statement. Yeah, that's what we do, yeah.
That's what we did when we were 19 years old on our first date.
Yeah.
I thought it was the greatest date to ever have. You don't have to ever talk. I've got stories that will take us through the date and emergency stories just in case. And then as we got older, we realized I need to get the date talking more. I need to get the client talking more. I need to get my child talking more, my spouse, my coworker. And I love that pause because rather than can't think of a question, here, let me tell you, I'm showing you I'm actively listening and I'm working on that next question. And both of us are feeling good. So what you brought up, I happen to agree with a great deal. Pauses are critical, and you have to train the mind to even do that.
So good. Who was this book written for? Because I want to say it's written for everybody based on what we've talked about here. But who did you have in mind when you wrote the book?
I had 2 parties in mind. One was I certainly will always be a brother to the sales community. That's who I've trained for 20 years on my own and close to 30 when you add Xerox and New York Life. But that book was written for the masses, and that's why we don't have a $ and sell like you've never sold before on the cover. You have a cat and a mouse, and you have how to change minds, and you have a deep discussion about ethics and the difference between influence and manipulation, because the rest of the world can't get past, I don't want to sell. I'm nervous about selling. So, okay, my car key story may have come out of that book, but I've got one with aging parents that took its place. That scenario repeats over and over again. And some of the things that we have to help our aging parents discover before they fall, before the car accident, before the issue. So I really did write it for everyone. And I mean that, everyone. And I've never had a book that I've written for everyone before. But this one, I just can't think of a scenario where influence is not needed. So that's who I wrote it for.
It's great. You also mentioned your salespeople, brothers and sisters. And so aside from active listening and great, powerful questions, what's another big mistake that salespeople are making?
I think the biggest mistake, and I can only use that once, so here it comes. I think the biggest mistake is that they have a sense of what the problem is, and the moment that they have a sense of what the problem is, the brain jumps to the solution and says, here, I've got it for you. Now, the good news is they actually do have it for them. That probably would work. Of course, if the person they're talking to were that much of a genius, they would have solved it already. So you're jumping the gun. Remember that metronome? Remember that pausing? One of the reasons why we need to pause is because to help people to fix these problems, rather than hit them with a solution and with passion, I have to help them study the problem deeper. I can't write the question down before I get in there. I have to listen to what you say, pause, process, and ask another question about what you just said. Now you see where the pause is coming in. I have to think, I have to listen, and I have to extend. I have to take it deeper. I can't. If we go deeper, we don't have to wait for the big problem to occur. We can have a conversation about it. But it requires a lot of mental agility, and that single-handedly is the biggest area that salespeople make a mistake with, and parents and managers and the rest of us. We want to solve everyone's problem. We need to help study the problem.
Very good. So we've got about 3 minutes left, so we're going to do some rapid-fire Q&A. Is that cool?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. What's one of your favorite questions to be asking?
Okay, I'm going to put a little disclaimer. Sometimes personality has to do with it. But I'll tell you a question I love. We talked about trust. How about this for a trust-based question? Not necessarily with the children now, but with a client. Everyone has a story. I'd love to hear yours. Imagine, Steve, what that question could get you. First of all, I could learn, are you dominant, analytical, social? How long is that response going to go? But B, you talk about warming a client up. You know, I never thought I'd get into broadcasting. And then one day, and here comes that story. Look how fast this relationship would jump with a question like that, rather than tell me about yourself isn't bad, but I love that question right off the bat.
And I love questions. That's a great example of questions that are the person will then add their own meaning to the question. So a lot of times when you ask a question that's short like that, and you recommend that people do that same thing, they say, well, don't you have to give them more information so they can understand what you're asking? Aren't they going to ask, well, how do you mean? No, usually not. They'll just go.
Exactly.
Right?
And I get your sense of personality. Because if you're analytical, you'll go with numbers. Yeah. And if you go with dominant, if we're dealing with a dominant, I got here in 84 and I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, that taught me a lot about you. And if I go with the social, we're going to hear a lot of stories, and that's okay too.
Yeah, when I work with clients on their customer experience, I'll interview their employees. And the first two questions I ask them is I say, in the context of the overall customer experience, first question is, what's working? Second question, what's not working?
Right.
Third question, what's missing?
Right.
They're two-word questions, right?
Right.
So, but they just go. They just go in the direction they're going to go. All right, we talked about active listening. You mentioned, we've got about a minute left, you mentioned the need to make opening adjustments and even personality adjustments.
Well, it took me a long time to get there. I sort of used to put my back up against the personality models, DISC and Myers-Briggs. They're wonderful. I just always felt they only taught me about me. What I like is starting to read emails, voicemails, appearance. If I'm in an office, I like to be able to read a personality very quickly and begin to figure out how many of these background questions do we ask, or how few. How deep do we go into the problem, or not deep. And a lot of that is going to be dependent on personality. So that's how I weave the two in. A, it's a read-through visual, email, voicemail, and B, it's just a contraction or expansion of the model based on personality.
I also wanted to ask you before we close out that the book's available in more than just this format, right?
It's ebook, it's a written book, it's an enhanced ebook, which I really love. It's a 25 minutes of video with actual role play, so you can see the conversations that we're describing. So I love that technology, and I did my first audio book on this one. And I think it's coming out in a week or two. So for those, particularly salespeople who like to drive their territories and don't really read as much but like to listen, I think we've got everybody covered.
And you read it. You didn't hire
I read it myself.
All right, cool. I love that. I love listening to books on CD or Audible, and when the author reads it and they've got a big personality like you do, I think that's just really cool. You've been watching We Mean Business. To learn more about Rob Jolles and all of his books, including his new book, How to Change Minds, you can visit wemeanbiz.tv. This is Steve Dorfman. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.